I used to think there was nothing sweeter than hearing your grown child say, "Mom, you deserve this." Just 5 words, but they stitched together every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every year I spent putting someone else first. So when my son Ethan called me from his office in Chicago and said those exact words, "Mom, you deserve this," I didn't question a thing. I didn't ask why he suddenly wanted to celebrate my 72nd birthday in Kyoto. I didn't wonder how he remembered my old dream of seeing the cherry blossoms in Japan, a dream I'd buried under bills and broken appliances. I just smiled and whispered, "You really mean it?" And when he laughed and said, "Of course, Mom, it's time someone took care of you for once," I believed him. That phone call came while I was pruning the rose bushes behind my little lake house in Minnesota. It was late March, and the frost was still clinging to the soil. But I remember the way my heart bloomed at that moment. Ethan said he'd already booked the flights. "Business class, Mom. You won't believe how comfortable it is." I wiped my hands on my gardening apron, sat down on the porch steps, and let the sunlight warm my face. "Kyoto," I said out loud to no one. The sparrows hopping around my bird feeder were the only witnesses to how much it meant to me. I hadn't left the country in decades. I hadn't left Minnesota in over a year. And yet here was my son, planning a once-in-a-lifetime trip just for me. Over the next week, I went into full planning mode, not because I needed to. Ethan said he'd handle everything, but because old habits die hard. I dug out the suitcase I hadn't used since Ethan's college graduation. I aired out my blouses, carefully folded scarves, and even bought new compression socks just in case. I spritzed lavender on my neck pillow like it was some kind of lucky charm. I even went to the bookstore and picked up 2 little gifts for my grandkids, handmade bookmarks and an illustrated book about Japanese temples. I tucked them into my bag with a quiet smile. It felt like everything I'd ever given. All the overtime shifts, the lonely holidays, the quiet sacrifices, was finally being returned in one beautiful gesture. My sister called during the week to check in. "Isn't Ethan still swamped with work?" she asked, and I laughed, because even she sounded surprised that he was taking time off. "He said he'd be working remotely while we're there," I told her, "but the trip is all for me. He remembered how I used to talk about Kyoto when he was a kid." There was a pause on the other end. "Well," she finally said, "maybe he's growing up." And I agreed. Maybe he was. The day before the trip, Ethan flew into town to join me for dinner. It was supposed to be my birthday celebration, just the 2 of us, and I had made reservations at a cozy Italian place I loved. But Ethan changed the plan last minute. "I already booked a spot," he said. "Modern place, great reviews." We ended up at a sleek new restaurant downtown, all metal and glass and fluorescent lighting. Cold, empty. His wife couldn't make it. The kids were at a recital. He barely looked up from his phone. I wore the green blouse he once said made me look like a lucky penny. He didn't notice. I tried to fill the silence with small talk, asking if he was excited, if there were any places he wanted to see. "It's your trip, Mom," he muttered, eyes still glued to his phone. Halfway through the meal, he stood up and said, "Work call." He disappeared for almost 2 hours. I sat there alone, sipping lukewarm tea and trying not to feel like a placeholder. When he finally returned, he acted like nothing happened. I paid the bill. Back at home, I asked if he could print the hotel confirmation and flight itinerary for me, just in case my phone battery died during the trip. "It's all digital now, Mom," he said. "Relax. I've got it." That should have been a red flag, but I chalked it up to generational differences. I reminded myself that Ethan was under pressure, that he had a lot on his plate, that this was still a generous thing he was doing. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea and watched the moon reflect off the lake. I whispered, "He's changing. He really is." And for the first time in years, I let myself believe that maybe I hadn't failed as a parent after all. Now, if you told me back then that this would become the start of a revenge story, I would have laughed. I was a mother, not a fighter. I didn't believe in revenge. I believed in grace, in forgiveness, in giving people space to become better. But sometimes grace is mistaken for weakness. And sometimes people don't grow up. They just grow better at hiding their intentions. Looking back, that week felt like a final performance. One last lullaby before the curtain dropped, before I realized that Ethan wasn't bringing me to Kyoto to make memories. He was sending me away, and he wasn't planning a celebration. He was setting a trap, and I walked right into it. By the time we got to the airport, the silence between us was thick enough to choke on. Ethan barely spoke during the car ride. His eyes stayed glued to the screen, thumbs dancing nonstop. I sat beside him, fingers fidgeting with the hem of my cardigan, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. The morning had started strangely. He rushed through breakfast, barely touched his eggs. I tried to lighten the mood with an old story about his dad, something funny about the time James got lost hiking and blamed the compass. Ethan barely reacted. Just a flat, huh, and back to tapping on his phone. "I'm just tired, Mom," he said when I finally asked. "Work stuff, don't worry." But I did worry. At the airport curb, he popped the trunk, handed me my suitcase, and said, "Text when you land." No hug, no photo, not even a smile. He didn't walk me in, just drove off like it was another Monday. I stood there with my suitcase handle in one hand and my passport in the other, watching his car disappear into the crowd. I told myself not to read into it. He'd been stressed. He always got like this before big projects, but there was a lump in my throat that wouldn't go away. It was my birthday, and it felt like a chore to him. Inside the terminal, I checked in and went through security with plenty of time. Still, I kept thinking about that awkward dinner the night before. The restaurant was cold, not just in temperature, but in soul. The walls were all steel and glass. No warmth, no music. He said it had great Yelp reviews, but it felt like a place designed to make you eat quickly and leave. He didn't even look up when I walked in. I wore the green blouse he used to say made me look like a lucky penny. Back when he was in middle school, he'd reach for that blouse on laundry day, press it against his cheek and say, "Smells like home." I doubt he even noticed I had it on. I kept the conversation light, asking if he had favorite Kyoto spots or if we could see the geishas, maybe take a boat down the canal. "I'll be busy," he said. "It's your trip. Just enjoy it." I nodded, pretending it was okay, pretending I didn't feel like a background character in my own celebration. At one point, I reached across the table and asked if he'd printed anything out. Hotel confirmation, maybe a schedule. My phone wasn't reliable lately. "Everything's digital, Mom," he said, not even looking up. Relax. Relax. The word echoed. I'd heard it before, so many times, usually right before something went wrong, when he forgot to pick me up from the hospital, when he overdrafted my account by accident, when he canceled Mother's Day brunch because he got stuck at work but posted photos at a golf course the next morning. I should have asked more questions, should have pressed for details. But if you're a mother, you know how that goes. You don't want to nag. You don't want to seem ungrateful. You tell yourself, maybe it's just you overthinking again. You tell yourself, silence is trust. And yet, part of me was screaming. Have you ever had that moment when your gut knows something your heart doesn't want to accept? Let me ask you this. If your child acted cold, distant, rushed through your birthday like a to-do list, would you speak up? Or would you do what I did and smile through it, praying you were just being sensitive? Let me know in the comments because I still wonder. Was it love that made me quiet or fear of hearing the truth? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing, opening and closing drawers. I packed and repacked my suitcase. I checked my passport 3 times, even though I knew it was there. I set my alarm early. Too early. I just needed the morning to come. When Ethan finally knocked, I met him outside with my suitcase already zipped. He didn't say happy birthday. He just opened the trunk, loaded the bag, and got in the car. We drove in silence. At the gate, I turned to say thank you, to say I loved him, to say this trip meant everything. But he was already pulling away, window rolled up, eyes back on his phone. I stood there for a long time, even after he was gone, wondering if maybe I'd done something wrong. Had I overstepped? Asked for too much? Expected more than he could give? But deep down, I knew the truth. I hadn't asked for anything. All I'd ever done was give. And somehow, giving had made me disposable. When I stepped off the plane in Kyoto, the air felt different. Warm, sweet, almost like spring itself had been bottled and uncorked just for me. I remember smiling to myself, despite everything, the awkward goodbye, the silence. I told myself maybe this was the turning point. Maybe once Ethan joined me tomorrow, things would feel right again. But that feeling didn't last long. The airport was clean and bright, buzzing with travelers speaking in languages I didn't understand. I followed the signs toward baggage claim, rolling my carry-on, clutching my purse close. I took out my phone to check the hotel confirmation Ethan said he'd emailed me. The screen flickered. 70% battery when I left Chicago. Now it blinked red. 2%. I swallowed the unease. I'd printed nothing. Ethan said I didn't need to. He had everything handled. Just enjoy the trip, he said. My phone died before I could even open the email app. I stood there frozen for a second, unsure where to go. I checked my wallet. Passport, check. One credit card, the one Ethan said he'd activated for international use. No cash. The $200 I always kept tucked behind my ID was gone. I must have left it behind in my rush. No hotel info, no address, no maps. I sat on a bench near the taxi line and tried to breathe. No panic, I told myself. You've traveled before, you're smart. You can figure this out. You raised a child, survived a failing marriage, outlived a husband, and worked double shifts through flu seasons and back pain and Christmases alone. This is just a bump. I dug into my carry-on, hoping I had scribbled something down. I found the boarding pass. On the back, I had jotted a name Ethan had casually mentioned. Hotel Ryumeikon, Kyoto. I waved down a taxi, pointed to the writing, and the driver nodded. We drove for about 20 minutes through quiet streets lined with paper lanterns and narrow shops. The city was beautiful, like something out of a postcard, but I was too tense to appreciate it. I clutched my bag the whole ride, telling myself everything would be okay once I got to the hotel, but it wasn't. At the front desk, the young woman behind the counter tilted her head politely when I gave her my name. She typed into the computer, then again, slower. "I'm sorry," she said in soft English. "No reservation." I blinked. "Try under Ethan Baines? He booked it." She checked again. Nothing, no email, no payment, no booking. She turned the screen toward me. My name wasn't there. That's when the panic began. I asked if she could call the airline to check my return flight info. Maybe there had been a mistake. She nodded, picked up the phone. I waited on a little velvet bench near the elevator, staring at my shoes, heart thudding in my chest like a trapped bird. She returned, face pale. "There is no return flight booked," she said quietly. I sat very still. No return flight. He hadn't just forgotten. He hadn't overlooked something. This wasn't a mistake. Ethan had left me here on purpose. A birthday gift that doubled as a goodbye. The blood drained from my face. My hands trembled. The bellhop behind the counter looked over with concern, but I shook my head. "I'm fine," I whispered, but I wasn't. I walked out of the hotel, sat on a nearby bench near a row of cypress trees, and stared at nothing. My mind was empty and full at the same time. Every memory I had of Ethan played on a loop. His first fever, his school plays, the peanut butter sandwiches I used to cut in little triangles because he said rectangles made him feel sad. And then came the memories I didn't want. Him missing birthdays, snapping at me when I reminded him to take his vitamins, rolling his eyes when I asked about his work. The way he once said, "You worry too much, Mom, it's exhausting." Exhausting. That's what I had become. Not someone who raised him, sacrificed for him, believed in him when no one else did, but a burden. I thought about the sapphire brooch I pawned to pay for his SAT tutor, the wedding ring I sold to cover his first semester when his loan didn't come through, the second job I picked up at the hospital gift shop so he could have spending money in college, the years I went without just so he could have more. And now? Now I was disposable. He hadn't even waited a day before making me vanish. My throat tightened as a new thought took root. Maybe he hadn't wanted me to come back. Maybe he hoped I'd get so lost in translation, in foreign laws and systems, that I'd end up forgotten, institutionalized, silenced. A problem solved. I wrapped my arms around myself, not because I was cold, but because I needed to hold something, anything and together. And still, through all the pain, one feeling rose higher than the rest. Shame. Not for what he did, but for how long I had let myself believe it was love. I found the little cafe by accident. My feet were sore from walking and my head throbbed with hunger and confusion. Tucked between two bookstores on a quiet Kyoto side street, its awning was faded, but the warmth inside was the first thing in hours that didn't make me feel invisible. The barista didn't speak much English, but he pointed kindly to a worn menu and led me to a corner table. They had Wi-Fi. I nearly cried. He handed me a charger and an old tablet. It took a few tries, but I logged into my Gmail account. I hadn't used it in ages, only kept it for old photos and online receipts, but the moment I was back in, I started digging. I searched for the hotel email Ethan swore he'd sent. Nothing. No confirmation, no bookings. I checked my bank account. Blocked. I checked my credit card. Declined. And then I opened my inbox. There at the top was a thread I wasn't supposed to see. Ethan had accidentally forwarded a chain from my niece Claire to me weeks ago. I clicked, thinking it was something harmless. But what I saw knocked the breath out of me. "He's starting to worry," Claire had written. "She forgot to pay taxes last year and repeats herself a lot. Maybe it's time someone stepped in." Ethan replied, "Exactly. I've been looking into power of attorney. I think she's slipping, but I want to handle it quietly." Another message, this time to my brother-in-law, Walter. "She booked 2 dentist appointments in the same week. Totally forgot. That's not normal." I sat there blinking at the screen, heart pounding. I hadn't forgotten anything. I'd made a second appointment because the hygienist was booked out for 6 months. The taxes. That was an IRS mistake. I had the corrected form in a drawer back home. He wasn't concerned. He was preparing a case. Stroke by stroke, he was painting me as unstable, not because I needed help, but because he needed control, power of attorney, access to my house, my finances, my name. He wasn't waiting for me to grow old or unwell. He was writing the ending early. And the trip? The trip was a setup. He created the very crisis he needed to prove I was incompetent. No phone, no money, no way home. Then he could swoop in, rescue me, and claim legal guardianship. I wasn't supposed to survive this alone. I wasn't supposed to figure it out. I was supposed to fail. I leaned back in my chair, the smell of espresso suddenly too strong, too bitter. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but rage. Pure, steady rage. I had spent a lifetime protecting this boy, from bullies, from his own bad choices, from the world. And now, he was trying to erase me. Not just move me into a home or close my bank account, but rewrite who I was, a confused, dependent, failing old woman. He wanted the house, the lake property I'd worked 30 years to pay off. He wanted the insurance I never told him about, the quiet savings account I built from leftover shifts and coupon clipping. He wanted it all, and he thought he could get it. Because I was quiet, because I'd always said yes, because I didn't fight back. But something shifted in me, sitting at that cafe table with a cracked tablet and a lukewarm cup of tea. Something old and buried came up like fire through frozen ground. I remembered what I was before I became a mother, a woman who'd survived a marriage full of silence, a woman who rebuilt her life after her husband passed, a woman who never once asked for recognition but deserved it all the same. I wasn't done. I wasn't gone. And I wasn't going to let him write me out. I opened a new email and typed in one name, Ray Donovan, my old lawyer, the one who handled James's estate, the one who looked me in the eye at the will reading and said, "You're the kind of client I never worry about because you know what you want." Subject line, prepare power of attorney challenge, immediate action, body returning ASAP. Ethan's building false claims. Need injunctions in place. Call me. I hit send, and for the first time in days, I felt my spine straighten. My hands still trembled, my chest still ached, but there was something inside me that steadied. He thought he'd buried me in a foreign country, but I'd found something better than a way out. I'd found the truth, and I planned to bring it home. Ray Donovan didn't ask a single question when he picked up the phone. I said, "It's me," and he said, "Dorothy, I was wondering when you'd call." It was 3:20 a.m., his time in Minneapolis, but he was already pouring coffee and pulling files. That's the kind of man he was. He asked where I was, if I was safe, what I knew so far. I told him everything, slowly, clearly, even the parts that made me feel stupid, like not printing my itinerary or letting Ethan handle all the details. Ray didn't flinch. "You're not stupid, Manta," he said firmly. "You were being a mother. He was being a manipulator." I hadn't cried since the hotel, but that line cracked something loose. I asked him what we could do. "Plenty," he said. Ray worked fast. Within hours, he filed an emergency motion with the county court to freeze all financial activity involving my estate. He also sent a letter to Ethan's attorney of record, warning him that any attempt to access my bank accounts, property deeds, or medical files would be considered preemptive fraud. It wasn't revenge, it was defense. Ray told me to stay put, to conserve my energy, and to keep documenting everything. He'd handle the fire at home. I just needed to get on the next plane back and be ready to stand tall. "I've seen sons like him before," Ray said. "They always underestimate the woman they came from." I hung up and stared at the chipped ceramic cup on the cafe table. The steam had faded, but I hadn't. I was still here. My fingers found steadiness I hadn't felt in days. Later that afternoon, I called Martha. She answered on the first ring. "Dorothy," she breathed. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm all right," I said, "but I need you to do a few things for me." I gave her a list. Go to the house, see if anything had been moved. Look for mail from any attorneys or real estate brokers. Call the gardener, ask if anyone's been walking the perimeter, and most importantly, water the roses. "Martha," I added, "I'm coming home, but not the same way I left." There was silence on the other end. Then, steady as always, she said, "I never thought I'd say this, but Ethan doesn't know who he's dealing with." Neither did I realized, because I'd forgotten who I was. I wasn't the woman who sat quietly in the back pew anymore. I wasn't the mother who kept excusing silence, who accepted being treated like an old coat in the closet. I was the woman who raised a son while working night shifts and balancing a checkbook down to the last penny. I was the one who clipped coupons, poured over insurance plans, and made a dollar stretch like it had magic. I was the one who buried a husband and built a life again. Alone. And now, I was building something else. A line. A boundary. Not out of spite, but out of survival. I booked my flight for the next morning, a one-stop journey through Seoul, then straight to Minneapolis. The airline had one seat left. I took it without hesitation. The barista at the cafe helped me call a taxi. He didn't speak much English, but when I told him home, he smiled kindly and bowed. That night, I stayed in a tiny hostel run by an elderly couple who barely spoke English, but who gave me hot tea and rice porridge and a quilted blanket that reminded me of home. The woman pressed her hand gently to mine as I checked in, and something about the kindness in her eyes made me feel like I was being stitched back together. I slept for 9 straight hours. When I woke, the sun was already up, and for the first time in over a week, I didn't feel lost. I brushed my hair, put on my earrings, and tied my scarf just right. I looked in the mirror and said out loud, "Let's go." The flight was long and full of turbulence, but it didn't rattle me. What shook me was the feeling of momentum, like my body finally remembered what it meant to move towards something instead of away from it. I didn't eat much on the plane, just sipped water and read through every document Ray had emailed me. He included a short note. "Stand tall. You're not asking for your life back. You're claiming it." As the flight descended into Minneapolis, I stared out the window and saw the frozen lake I'd lived beside for nearly 4 decades. It looked different now. Not just colder, but quieter. Like it had been waiting for me. At baggage claim, I didn't cry. I didn't rush. I simply stood up, straightened my coat, and walked out like a woman with nothing to prove and everything to protect. The snow was still fresh on the ground when my taxi pulled into my neighborhood. I hadn't seen it in 2 weeks, but it felt like years. The street looked the same. Quiet, suburban, trimmed hedges, and lazy mailboxes. But my house had changed. It wasn't the color or the shutters or the wreath on the door. It was the lights. Bright white LEDs had replaced my warm yellow porch bulbs, the ones I always kept soft, glowing, like a whisper saying, "Someone's home." That glow was gone. As we neared the driveway, I saw it. Cars, 3 of them. One was Ethan's silver sedan, parked crooked, like he always did when he thought rules didn't apply. The other 2 were rentals, newer, sleeker, out-of-state plates. My stomach tightened. He wasn't just staying there. He was entertaining. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "This the place?" I nodded. "Yes, this is mine." I stepped out slowly, feeling the frozen gravel under my boots, my fingers tightening around the handle of my suitcase. My lawyer, Ray, had asked me to wait until morning. "Let me file everything first." He said. "Let the courts work in your favor." But I knew my timing was perfect, because through the front window, I saw Ethan raise a glass of champagne. The living room, my living room, was lit up like a showroom. And in the center, surrounded by 2 well-dressed strangers and a notary I didn't recognize, was my son. Laughing, smiling, celebrating. He held a manila folder and waved it like a flag. "It's all wrapped up," I heard him say. "Signed, sealed, delivered. She's in Japan, completely out of the loop." One of the women leaned forward. "You're sure she's not coming back?" Ethan laughed. "Come on, she could barely keep track of her doctor appointments. She thinks this trip was her idea." That was it. I'd seen enough. Now let me ask you something. If you walked up to your own front door and saw your child celebrating your erasure, what would you do? Would you bang the door down? Would you scream? Or would you do what I did and walk in like you never left? Let me know in the comments, because I know some of you have been in that spot. Maybe not this exact one, but close enough to taste the same kind of betrayal. I opened the front door. No knocking, no hesitation. Just me, standing in the frame, letting the heat from the house hit my cheeks like a slap. The room went silent. Glasses stopped midair. Eyes froze. Ethan's mouth fell open. He dropped the folder. "Mom?" I stepped in fully, shut the door behind me, and let my suitcase rest by my feet. I looked around the room. My furniture, my rugs, the lamp James and I bought on our 20th anniversary, all of it, being used as stage props in a play I was never meant to see. "Didn't expect me so soon, did you?" I said, voice low. Ethan stammered. I thought you were still in Kyoto." "I was," I said, "and now I'm not." Ray appeared behind me and right on cue, holding a thick folder of papers. "Mr. Ethan Baines," he said calmly, "you are hereby served emergency injunction, restraining order, asset freeze, and revocation of any pending power of attorney filings." One of the men in the room stood quickly. "I think we should leave." "We say yes, yes." I watched them gather their bags, muttering apologies, looking anywhere but at me. And Ethan? He stood in the middle of it all, no champagne now, no grin, just a pale face and twitching hands. "Why are you doing this?" he finally whispered. I tilted my head. "You mean protecting what's mine?" He looked like a child again, not the grown man who planned my exile. Just a boy caught red-handed, shocked that his mother wasn't as disposable as he'd hoped. I stepped past him, walked into the kitchen, and ran my hand along the countertop. Still smooth, still mine. Then I turned back and said, "You can leave now." He didn't move. Ray stepped forward. "You no longer have legal residence here. Any refusal to vacate will be considered trespassing." Ethan looked at me one last time. "You'll regret this." I met his eyes. "No, you will." He grabbed his coat and walked out, slamming the door behind him. And just like that, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't lonely. It was peace. I picked up the glass he'd left behind and dumped the champagne into the sink. I wiped down the counter, set the thermostat to my usual 70, and turned the porch light back to soft yellow. Then I sat down in my chair, closed my eyes, and breathed. I was home. The morning after I took back my house, I woke to a quiet I hadn't felt in years. Not the silence of being ignored or forgotten, the kind that used to settle in around me like fog, but the kind that hummed with clarity. I made a pot of coffee, the real kind, not the watered-down hotel stuff I'd grown used to. I drank it slowly, sitting at the kitchen table Ethan once used to do homework on. My fingers traced the small etchings he'd carved when he was 8. A stick figure, a sun, the letter E. He used to call this place our home. Somewhere along the way, that became his house. Not anymore. Ray arrived around 9 a.m., dressed in his usual navy suit, holding a manila folder thicker than the phone book. He set it on the counter, poured himself a cup of coffee without asking, we had that kind of history, and said, "Today, we draw the line." I nodded. We didn't need a speech, we just needed signatures. Together, we reviewed every document. Emergency order to revoke Ethan's temporary financial access, property protections filed with the county recorder, a revised will removing Ethan entirely, a durable power of attorney assigned to my niece, Claire. When we reached the last page, Ray handed me a pen. I held it for a moment, breathing in the weight of everything it symbolized. Then I signed, slowly, firmly. My name, Dorothy Baines, written in ink, not fear. "Is it enough?" I asked quietly. Ray looked at me with something close to pride. "It's more than enough. You've got your voice back." The courthouse was quiet when we arrived, just a few people waiting for early hearings. Nothing dramatic, no slamming gavels or echoing verdicts. Just paperwork, quiet steps, and the hum of printers churning out the truth. Ethan was already there. He sat on a bench outside the courtroom, dressed like a man pretending not to be nervous. He stood when he saw me, forced a smile. "Mom, can we talk?" I looked him in the eye, not as a mother, not as a victim, as a woman who had finally stopped explaining herself. "No." He blinked. "Just 5 minutes." I turned away and entered the courtroom without another word. The hearing was brief. Ray presented the case with clean facts, no theatrics, just dates, documents, patterns, all building the picture Ethan had tried to draw of me, forgetful, unstable, lost. The judge looked over the petition for power of attorney Ethan had filed 2 days after I landed in Kyoto. She raised an eyebrow. "No medical documentation? No physician recommendation?" she asked. Ethan's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. We believed there was enough anecdotal concern to act in good faith." Jesse, the judge didn't buy it. She struck down the petition within 15 minutes, citing lack of evidence, signs of coercion, and abuse of process. She signed the restraining order renewal immediately after. Outside the courtroom, Ethan approached again. His face had changed. Not angry, not apologetic, just hollow. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. I looked at him for what felt like the first time in years. Past the adult exterior, past the guilt I'd worn like a second skin. And I said the truth. "Because this isn't yours to claim." He flinched. "You're my mother." "I was," I said. "And I gave everything I had, my time, my home, my name. And you used it all to build a version of me that served your goals, not my dignity." He stood there, stunned. I kept going. "You don't get to erase me, Ethan. You don't get to rewrite my story, to make yours easier." He tried to speak. I didn't let him. "You made choices, and now I'm making mine." I walked past him, Ray beside me, the echo of my heels steady on the courthouse floor. Back in the car, I exhaled so deeply, it felt like I'd been holding my breath for 10 years. Ray didn't say anything for a long time. Then, softly, he muttered, "That boy just ran into a wall he never thought you'd build." I looked out the window at the city I'd lived in for 4 decades. The courthouse, the cafe on the corner where James once proposed, the school Ethan used to run toward after class. So many memories, so much love. But now I finally understood. Love without boundaries isn't love. its erasure. It didn't take long for the news to spread. A small town like ours doesn't let much stay secret, especially when it involves court orders, family betrayal, and the kind of quiet scandal that's just juicy enough to discuss at book club, but painful enough to lower voices when my name comes up. I didn't have to say a word. People started asking questions on their own. It began with Martha, of course. She was the kind of neighbor who knew everything 3 minutes before it happened. She hadn't spoken a single word to Ethan since that day I called her from Japan. So when she ran into Susan Phelps at the post office, the same Susan whose daughter used to date Ethan in high school, she let it slip just once. Dorothy's back. She handled things. By the next day, Susan's daughter had posted something vague on Facebook. Some people don't realize who they're messing with until the paperwork shows up. No names, no context, but everyone knew. And then came the emails. 3 women from church reached out privately. One had noticed Ethan clearing out my china cabinet a week before I returned. Another remembered him mentioning how his mother was getting a little too tired to handle finances anymore. And the third, bless her soul, admitted she'd been invited to a small gathering at my home while I was supposedly on an extended retreat. And they all apologized, not for what they did, but for what they didn't see. And I understood, because for years I didn't see it either. I didn't see how slowly Ethan had been reshaping my image in the world's eyes, how subtly he'd been preparing everyone to doubt me. It wasn't just gaslighting, it was social groundwork, a kind of emotional laundering, turning strong into controlling, attentive into overbearing, independent into the confused. But now people were remembering, not just what he said, but who I'd always been. When the church's community bulletin came out, my name was listed again under the Widow's Circle, with a note, "Welcome back, Dorothy." No fanfare, no pity, just a line that told me I wasn't invisible anymore. What hit harder was what wasn't said about Ethan. He showed up at Sunday service the following week alone, sat 2 pews back from his usual spot. No one turned him away, but no one greeted him either. No handshake, no smile, just polite nods and cool glances. Not cruel, just say, cold. I didn't attend that service. I didn't need to. Martha told me everything. He sat there like a stranger in his own house, she said. People didn't shun him. They just didn't see him anymore. I nodded. That was enough. Later that week, I went to the grocery store, the same store where the cashier used to ask, "How's your son?" every time I bought orange juice, because Ethan loved it as a boy. This time she scanned my items, looked up and said, "You look good, Dorothy. Real good." It was the way she said it, like I had stepped out of a fog, like she finally saw me again, not as someone's mother, but as someone who survived. And in that moment, standing in the frozen aisle with a loaf of rye bread and a bag of decaf, I felt something deeper than victory. I felt restoration, not revenge, not satisfaction, just the quiet return of what was mine, my place, my dignity, my name. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky but familiar. Inside was a short note. "Mom, you made your point. I didn't think it would get this far. I guess I underestimated you. I hope someday you'll forgive me. Ethan." I folded the paper once, placed it in a drawer I hadn't opened in years, and went outside to water the roses. They'd started blooming again, brighter than I remembered. Funny how things grow when you stop begging them to. The roses came in fuller that year. I don't know if it was the fertilizer Martha swore by or just the timing of things. How sometimes, when a storm passes, even the ground sighs and begins again. I stood out there most mornings, just me, my gloves, and the pruning shears James gave me on our last anniversary. The peace didn't come all at once. It came in layers, quiet ones. At first, I still jumped when the phone rang, still braced when the mail arrived, still hesitated before logging into my bank account. But day by day, the fear softened, the edge dulled, and in its place grew something sturdier, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Not the loud kind, Not the throw it in their face kind, just the kind where you wake up and realize, I don't owe anyone my silence anymore. I signed up for a watercolor class at the senior center, something small, Tuesdays at 10. The first day, I almost didn't go. I worried people would whisper. I worried someone would bring up Ethan, but they didn't. They just smiled, handed me a brush, and said, "Glad you made it." I hadn't painted in decades. Turns out I still remembered how to blend blues. There's a stillness that comes when you create something just for yourself, not for praise, not to prove a point, just because your hands need to move and your heart needs to rest. And funny enough, one of the women in class, a soft-spoken widow named Irene, asked me halfway through, "You live by the lake, don't you?" I nodded. She smiled. "I always thought that porch light of yours looked warm." Warm. The word landed harder than it should have, because for so long, I thought warmth meant letting everyone in, even the ones who chipped away at me. But now I knew better. Warmth wasn't about being available. It was about being alive, even when no one's watching. A few weeks later, I hosted a book club at my house, first time in years. I set out lemon bars, made fresh tea, and dusted the shelves. I didn't try to impress anyone. I didn't over-explain anything. And when someone asked, "So, where's Ethan these days?" I simply said, "He's doing his own thing." And we moved on. No gasps, no gossip, just grace. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the porch with a blanket and looked out at the lake. The reflection of the moon danced on the water, and I thought, this is what healing looks like. Boring, beautiful, quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't perform. It just shows up and stays. Let me ask you something. Have you ever rebuilt your life without making noise? Just slowly, one tiny act of courage at a time, getting out of bed, saying no without guilt, making soup for yourself on a Tuesday night because you deserve flavor? If you have, leave a comment. Not for attention, but because someone else scrolling through might need to know they're not alone. That starting over doesn't require fireworks, just breath, just time, and maybe a lemon bar or two. Martha came by the next morning with cuttings from her garden. She looked around and said, "Feels different in here." "It is," I said. "Are you lonely?" she asked. I smiled. "No, not anymore." And I meant it. Because once you stop chasing acknowledgement and start standing in your own stillness, loneliness changes. It becomes solitude, a place where your thoughts don't echo in pain, but hum in peace. I didn't miss Ethan. I missed the boy he used to be. But even that grief had grown quieter now. No longer sharp, just a soft ache I carried, like an old song I used to hum, but don't need to sing anymore. I started volunteering on Thursdays, reading to kids at the library. Funny how they listen without judgment. They just want stories. They don't care where you've been, what your son said, or how many times your voice cracked trying to defend yourself. They just listen. And maybe that's the greatest gift of all, being heard. Not because you fight for space, but because you've stopped apologizing for taking it. It was late spring when Ethan came by. I was trimming the lavender by the fence, my gloves stained with soil, sun on my back, and that kind of breeze that only shows up in May. Just enough to remind you the world keeps moving, even if people don't. I didn't hear his car, just his voice. "Hi, Mom." I turned around, slowly, still holding my shears. He looked different, not older, just smaller. Like life had humbled him in the places I never could. There was a weariness around his eyes I hadn't seen before, not the result of stress, but of seeing himself clearly. He was holding a paper bag. "Thought I'd bring you lunch," he said. "That soup you used to like? The one with barley." I didn't say anything. He stepped forward. "I know I should have called. I didn't think you'd answer anyway." He was right. I watched him set the bag down on the bench by the porch. He didn't try to hug me, didn't reach for anything, just stood there, like he knew the silence between us wasn't something you could fill with words. "I just wanted to say thank you," he finally said, "for letting me be born to someone better than I ever deserved. That stopped me. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first time he'd said something without expecting an answer. I nodded once, just that. Then I turned back to the lavender. He didn't linger, didn't ask to come in, didn't ask for forgiveness. He just left the soup and walked back to his car. I didn't cry. I didn't chase him. I didn't replay his words all night like I used to. I just finished my trimming, washed my hands, and had a bowl of barley soup on the porch with my feet up, watching the sky soften into evening. You see, healing doesn't mean the story wraps up neatly. It means you no longer need it to. There's power in refusing to be pulled back into cycles, in knowing that just because someone shows up with better words doesn't mean you owe them anything. Sometimes growth is letting someone speak without needing to respond, without anger, without softness either, just presence. Ethan's visit didn't change my life, but it confirmed something I already knew. I had nothing left to prove. He can live with what he did, and I can live with what I've become. The next day, I took the leftover soup to Martha's. We had lunch in her backyard while her cat chased bugs in the tall grass. I told her what happened. She didn't interrupt, just listened like she always did. When I was done, she nodded and said, "You're stronger than most women I know." I smiled. I'm just tired of explaining myself. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen window. Not for Ethan, not for James, not for anyone who left, but for the version of me that had stayed. Through silence, through humiliation, through betrayal. She deserved the light. I had the envelope ready for days before I dropped it off. A plain manila folder, sealed carefully. No sticky notes or dramatic instructions. Just my new will, notarized and witnessed, tucked inside. My lawyer, Ray, told me I didn't have to explain anything to anyone. "It's your estate, Dorothy," he said, "not a group decision." He was right. I walked into the law office like I was going to the grocery store. No makeup, no fancy shoes, just me, and years of knowing that gratitude should never have to be begged for. Ray's assistant greeted me with a soft smile, took the folder, and handed me a receipt. That was it. 5 minutes. A quiet undoing of everything Ethan thought was guaranteed. Because the house, the lakefront property he used to brag about inheriting, that's going to Claire, my niece, the one who visited even when she didn't need anything. The savings account, split between the local library and the children's hospital, places that had no idea how much they'd helped me stay sane over the years. And the trust fund? Left in the name of a girl named Marcy, the daughter of my former housekeeper, who once helped me shovel snow at 6 a.m. with bare hands and never asked for a dime more than she earned. I left Ethan nothing. Not to punish him, but to finally stop rewarding his silence, his arrogance, his assumption that love was owed and not earned. I thought about adding a letter, something gentle, something fair. But then I realized the absence is the letter. He'd open the will one day and find space where his name should have been. And that space would say everything. That's how I wanted to leave it. Some people think leaving someone out of your will is cruel. But to me, cruel was building a life around people who never once asked how you were really doing. Cruel was calling your mother a burden because she asked for help booking a flight. Cruel was standing in her living room, drinking champagne, thinking she was too far away to come back. No, this wasn't cruelty. This was clarity. That afternoon, I sat on my porch, tea in hand, lavender blooming at my feet, and I thought about how peace isn't always soft. Sometimes it looks like boundaries, like firm lines drawn in ink and law and self-respect. I thought back to the early years, when Ethan was little, and I used to whisper in his ear while he slept, "One day, you'll understand what love costs." That maybe now he finally does, or maybe he never will, but that's not my burden to carry anymore. And I hope someone reading this, someone who spent years wondering if they're cruel for walking away, for drawing lines, for choosing silence over begging, hears me when I say, you are not cruel, you are wise. And wisdom often looks like walking out quietly, then locking the door behind you. I rocked gently on my porch swing as twilight settled over Lake Minnetonka, the air cool but soft, carrying the scent of blooming roses and pine from the shore. Behind me, the lantern by the front door glowed golden, a beacon I'd returned after reclaiming everything that was mine. In the distance, children's laughter drifted up from the park, a reminder that life marches on, even after you think it's been put on pause. For the first time in months, I felt no tremor in my chest. The world felt steady beneath my feet, and I let myself exhale. The rose garden, once neglected under the weight of betrayal, had thrived while I was away. Martha tended it in my absence, but I had pruned and fed every plant with my own hands since returning. Watching the buds unfurl now, I saw more than petals and thorns. I saw my own journey from brokenness into quiet strength. Each blossom was a testament to survival, how something beautiful can emerge from what almost killed it. I reached out to touch a pale pink bloom, its soft edge brushing my palm like an old friend. Below my notebook on the small wicker table lay the final draft of my new diary entry. Not pages full of sorrow or anger, but simple lines. I am not defined by what was taken from me. I am defined by what I have chosen to keep. My dignity, my peace, my light. I paused there, pen hovering, and thought of Ethan. I had expected fury when I first reclaimed my house. Instead, I found numb acceptance. Revenge might satisfy in stories, but in the end, it's self-respect that heals. I didn't need him to suffer. I only needed myself to stand. I thought back to the day I changed my will, removing his name without drama. Some might call that cruel, but I saw it as clarity, freeing both of us from a narrative neither of us deserved. That act wasn't about punishment, it was about honoring those who truly cared. Claire, Marcy, the children at the hospital, the library where I volunteered, they were the ones who never stopped seeing me. By the time I'd filed the papers, I realized that cutting ties on paper had already freed my heart. In the quiet of that porch, I reflected on what victory means. It isn't the clatter of court battles or the echoes of gavel strikes. It's the hush after the storm, the space to breathe without fear. It's painting roses in watercolor class, even when no audience is watching. It's reading stories to giggling kids who don't know your history. It's sitting with a cup of chamomile tea and feeling grateful you can. I looked down at the notebook again and added one last sentence. Not because of revenge, but because of love I refuse to let die. I closed the cover, tucked the pen beside it, and let dusk seep into my skin. The lantern light flickered, and I recognized that glow wasn't just from a bulb. It was the light I'd saved for myself all along. I stood and walked to the edge of the porch, turning off the lantern. The house behind me faded into silhouette, but the garden still glowed. The path to the street was softly lit by solar stakes I'd installed, each one marking a step I took back toward myself. I smiled, knowing that when morning came, I'd wake to another day of choice, another chance to tend the garden, volunteer, write, and simply be. Before I turned in for the night, I placed my hand over the first rose bush, bent low and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, but to the universe, and to the little girl I once was, who dreamed of strong roots and open skies. She survived storms I could hardly imagine back then, and now I lived in the calm she fought for. Sometimes the strongest thing we ever do is in silence. Waking up and choosing not to call the person who hurt us, cooking a warm meal just for ourselves, or simply deciding to keep going when no one's watching. That's what this story was about. Not revenge in fire and fury, but a quiet kind of reclamation. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever rebuilt your life piece by piece after being overlooked, abandoned, or underestimated? Maybe it was after your children stopped visiting. Maybe it was when you were called a burden, or when someone you loved forgot your worth. Whatever your moment was, I see you. I know it wasn't easy, but you did something brave, even if no one else noticed. I'd love if you shared one small act of quiet courage you took to reclaim your dignity. Maybe you moved out. Maybe you stopped answering certain calls. Maybe you started gardening again. Whatever it was, leave it in the comments, not for sympathy, but so others who are still in their storm can see that peace is possible. Your story matters.